Hello there guys, what is going on? SonOfChelsea back here again for another collab with a great Chelsea guest, Dan McCarthy, a returning guest to the channel. The last time I spoke to Dan was back in October, so a lot of things have changed, but I really enjoyed that conversation we had. We spoke so much about tactics and coaching. Of course, Dan McCarthy is a coach himself, former player, so he's coaching out in America, so he has lots of insight in terms of the tactical side of the game. And in the first part of our discussion that you're watching today, we speak about Thomas Tuchel's tactics since arriving at Chelsea. We naturally touch on Frank Lampard's departure. Also, transfers will be in the second part of our discussion, which I'll upload tomorrow, where we speak about N'Golo Kante, Erling Haaland, the search for a centre-back, and CDM2. Lots of stuff to get into. I really enjoy speaking to Dan, and I'm sure like a lot of you know him at MaxSport on Twitter. He's worked with Simon Phillips, another friend of the channel. So great to speak to Dan once again. Very grateful for him giving up his time to speak to me about Chelsea and recent events. I hope you guys enjoyed the discussion. If you do, hit that like button and also subscribe so you don't miss any of the new content surrounding Chelsea on this channel. Let's get to the chat right now. So Dan, thanks for joining me once again. The last time we spoke, and it's so typical with Chelsea just as a club. I think it represents how mad Chelsea as a club are. The last time we spoke was pre-Halloween. And of course, it was a very different time at Chelsea then to what it is now. And not only in terms of what's happened at Chelsea recently, but also for you personally, you and Simon Phillips have sort of collabed. You've got your podcast now too. What's it been like for you the last few months, sort of not only creating content about Chelsea, but watching Chelsea as a supporter?
It's been mental. I think that's the best way to sum it up, Dan. It's been a mental few months. I think anybody dealing with Simon Phillips every day of the week will have a tough time. But jokes aside, it's been brilliant. As being a Chelsea supporter, and as you've been doing this for a long time, it's different when you kind of do content for the club and you work within the club and you talk to people and are connected with people within the club. So yeah, it's been a mental ride. The whole part-time, full-time shift is interesting for sure, but can't complain, man. It's been great, and obviously it's Chelsea Football Club, so there's always something going on. That's for sure.
Predictably unpredictable, and maybe that's the good thing. If you're making content around a club, there isn't really a dull moment, especially when there's a change of manager. I don't want to sort of spend too long on this, but I think having you back on the channel, I think it'd be silly of me not to, of course, bring up the sacking of Frank Lampard and sort of all of that madness a few weeks ago. Because as I said, the last time we spoke, we were sort of going into that 17-game unbeaten run where it looked like we shifted to the 4-3-3. It looked like things were good. It was going to start clicking. Some of the new players were working well. And of course, it all went downhill very quickly over Christmas. Just sort of your feelings about how it went wrong for Frank and sort of how quickly it actually happened, because it was a bit like whiplash, not only in terms of him being sacked and then Tuchel being appointed, but just how literally it was almost like a month, wasn't it? It deteriorated so quickly after Leeds. Just your take on all of that madness.
Yeah, I think the more you read into it, the more you look at it, it was never the project we thought it was. It was more of a stopgap. It was a very political / smart move by the board to appoint Lampard at the time they did, for the length they did, and for the way they did. And what I mean by the way is, it was clearly just and I don't want to be too tough on the club because it's a business decision and it's harder to make these decisions than you can imagine. But yeah, Lampard was coming to play the youth, to settle the squad, to settle the fan base. And that was really it. And it was very apparent, right, that as soon as a bad run occurred, he would be gone. And the bad run occurred, and there he was. So it was very preempted. It was very pre-planned. And that's a shame, right, for the guy behind you on your left there to be kind of gone. And it is a shame. And I thought he was gone too soon. That doesn't mean I don't love Tuchel and what we're doing now. I do like Tuchel. I've always rated him as a coach. I just wanted to see more of Lampard. I wanted to see if he could really recover this team. And unfortunately, we didn't get that. And I've said it in my own work. I think Lampard will be back eventually, which will be great when he goes away and he learns from it. It was a lack of experience, which he would admit to. Some things he got wrong, which he'd admit to. He was tactically found out, which we should have expected, by the way. For us to expect Lampard to compete with Pep Guardiola and Klopp and Bielsa in his first year tactically is impossible. So we kind of got what we knew, but I just wish we got a little bit more time. And Dan, to be honest, buddy, I wanted to definitely give you and hopefully you can crop this and share this because it will hopefully help. I read your article yesterday. I can't believe I hadn't seen it before. I was shocked I didn't see it before. I read it yesterday, and it was probably the best article I've read on Lampard, honestly. It epitomed everything I was thinking and feeling too, to be honest. maybe a little bit more severe on your part because of maybe, I don't know, because of age, I'm not sure. But I felt everything you felt in that article, and the way you described it, the way you kind of told it as a story, and the kind of, you touched on both sides of the game, the people who argue against it and the people who are saying take away the affinity of the player to the manager, which is so much harder to do than you think. Honestly, brilliant article. So if people are going to ask me what I think about Lampard and what I thought about the whole thing, I can give my own views, but maybe it'd be better to point them to your article because you did it very well.
Thank you, mate. Yeah, that's very kind of you. And yeah, it has been a few weird weeks, sort of as I sort of talked about on the channel and talked about in that article. And it's been tough. It has. There's no denying that, as I sort of illustrated in my article. And it's been quite humbling, actually. And of course, I want to obviously be interviewing you, but just on that piece, it's quite humbling and enlightening and comforting in a sense to see that so many people feel the same way. And there's not this stigma of sort of shame around it, people. And I think there needs to be a concept of who this individual was. It was not any other coach. You can't treat this guy like any other coach. And I think it's a bit of a shame it got so toxic at the end, didn't it? So, but we need to look forward. Obviously, Thomas Tuchel and things have been really positive recently. Chelsea are back to winning ways, and as a supporter, you can't complain about that. We're back in the top four. We're going into some big games coming up with more confidence. Funny enough, you talk about articles. You wrote an article very recently, I think today at the time of recording. It was released about Thomas Tuchel's counter press, and I wanted to speak about Tuchel because you did say you're an admirer of him and sort of bringing him into the situation. I just think take away the tactics, which I think are very interesting with you to speak about formation-wise, but I feel his sort of PR side of things and sort of the way he's handled himself from the first interview he did to the first press conference he did, for me, has struck the right tone. And I think in a very difficult time personally for him coming into a club that is a little bit fractured, especially from supporters, I think he's struck the right tone. What do you think about him? Because he's like exceeded expectation on that front for me.
I think he's a very smart man. I think he couldn't have handled the transition any better in the current circumstances. He paid tribute to Lampard. He was very transparent on how long he's here for and what he's trying to do and what the club's given him and the expectations. He's been very transparent, which I think is very good for the supporters to hear, right? So yeah, he couldn't have handled it any better. The media, I know he said the other day that he's not just saying it to be a nice guy, and he won't just say it to the players to be a nice guy. We will see eventually. I don't want to say the real Thomas Tuchel because he is here and he's doing what he wants to do, but we will see the other side of him as time goes on. He's a very demanding manager. He's a very expectant coach. And he can be edgy with the media, which is fine. It doesn't really matter at this point. It's just about the media. It's just about the results. So, Lampard was the media darling and it didn't really get him that far. So, I don't think we're that worried. It's great to hear him. I think everyone's enjoying his press conferences. He's saying the right things. He's trying the right things in training. He's a complete, hybrid. He's a complete... I can't think of the word, but completely different to Lampard. He's completely different. He's a tactical comedian, which Lampard simply wasn't. So yeah, he's handled the transition very well. He's doing his job. He's getting results, which is very important. That's exactly what it is at Chelsea Football Club. It's a results-driven business in football, but especially Chelsea. And he's doing great. And I would just say that I'm kind of on the side of caution, even though I rate the guy and I like the guy. The run was very kind. You still have to win the games. You still have to win them, and it's not easy. But I'm really going to judge him, I think, when we see, Champions League against Atletico, when we see him against United, City. That will tell us how close Chelsea are to them clubs, because that's eventually what our goal is, right, to compete at the top. So I'll be waiting for that before I really cast a full judgment, but so far, so good.
Yeah, I think it is that thing for me of he's winning games. He's got Chelsea winning games professionally, like getting the job done efficiently. I think for me, the most impressive one actually wasn't Spurs. I think it was Sheffield United, because based on what happened at Bramall Lane last year, based on the fact it was a game where it turned and it was 1-1, and we've seen Chelsea collapse before in situations like that recently, especially under Lampard, and the way we sort of stemmed that sort of storm and got back on top and scored and kept a clean sheet. I think defensively there's been improvement, but I absolutely agree with you. I think I tweeted this the other day that I think if your logic earlier in the season was that good run was sort of based on the favourable opposition we had. I think you have to apply the same logic here, right? With the exception of Spurs, who were pretty awful on the night, in all honesty, weren't they? You know, they didn't offer a lot, and they were quite similar to Burnley and Sheffield United and Newcastle, being very defensive. Southampton going to press up the pitch. Atletico Madrid, top of La Liga, have some quality players, and Diego Simeone, tactically wonderful in terms of a coach, in terms of knowing how to deal with these. So yeah, I agree with you. You wrote the piece about the counter press, and I had Marius Fisher, who knows a lot about Tuchel, on the week he was appointed, and we spoke about the gegenpress, counter press, what he was going to bring to Chelsea. I did feel against Newcastle in the first half, our press was a lot more intense than it has been. You know, do you think that's a case of just him continuing to work with the players? And it's interesting because it seems like it's a mix of having that counter press to get the ball back and dominate possession, which I think to some people may seem, when you look at Klopp's teams, for instance, that's a little bit different to Klopp because it's about counter-attacking on teams. It seems like we're pressing hard to win the ball back and then dominate possession.
I saw a little clip on that interview you did with Fisher, and it was good. So in my article, I kind of touch on like the 3 key points. I don't know if you've read it yourself or people who are listening or eventually listen will see this. But the third point was the one that was kind of controversial, a little bit different. And you kind of touched on it. It was, so why are we winning the ball back just to possess it again? And I wrote that in my article. And the reason is because we're so early into Tuchel's reign that we need possession for a lot of reasons. Show our dominance in the game, which Chelsea need to do. We're a dominant club. We have to dominate games. We simply have to. It's also a representation of the fact that we're not as clinical and efficient as we need to be right now. So the more we have possession and the more chances we create, the more likely we will score goals. Excuse me. We're not Man City, where we can have two chances a game and probably score both. And I know Tuchel wants to get there. We will get there with a lot of things: time, tactics, lots of time on the training field, and also him signing 1 or 2 of his players that he wants to sign. He has to have the opportunity to do that. So it's a great point, Daniel. And it's definitely the counter press is key. It's so key to Tuchel's to his tactics, and that's why I wrote on it. And hopefully I'll do more of those in the future. But yeah, it's definitely he wants to dominate the ball, and he wants to create lots and lots of chances in order to get gains. And he's fully aware that it needs to be better in the final third. He keeps saying this word, precise. And he knows that eventually teams will kind of maybe be better with our counter press. Teams will set up differently to counteract our counter press, and we might not get 10, 20 chances. We might not have 70% of the ball. So when we don't, we have to be more clinical, and that will come with time for sure, but it's definitely exciting.
Yeah, that's been an issue at Chelsea for a number of years, pretty much since Costa left. We haven't been that clinical in front of goal, and obviously losing Hazard as well. It's about replacing that. What do you think about sort of his ability to reintegrate players that I think a lot of us felt their days were done at Chelsea, like Marcos Alonso, even to a certain extent Kepa Arrizabalaga, and obviously he said after Newcastle he's not the first choice, but even a player like that getting a chance in the Premier League, I didn't expect to happen. And maybe not the same Antonio Rudiger, but Rudiger very much now feels like a guaranteed starter. Kovacic and Jorginho now feel like the main starting pair in midfield, at least for now. There is a sense of pragmatism there, and I know that's annoyed some fans because the likes of Hakim Ziyech and Christian Pulisic and Kurt Zouma and Ben Chilwell have not been guaranteed starters, but he's getting those results. And do you think this is just sort of for him, it's a short-term thing? These players might not be here next season.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to know right now what he wants and what he doesn't. Chelsea haven't sat down and mapped out a transfer plan as of yet with Tuchel. That's going to be happening later, end of this month, next month kind of time. So we don't really know what he wants yet. The club doesn't really know who he's looking at and what he wants yet. I know he's kind of said, he liked it with Magano and he likes this player, but there's no real strategy yet. So he's obviously very clear in using the whole squad. By the way, the fans who are complaining about not saying, every single match day, there's going to be players left out because that is the sheer quality of our squad. And that is a good problem to have. It's a very good problem. We've complained in the past, right, of our bench being horrendous. And there's just no options on the bench. And we have to win the game in the first 70 minutes because the bench isn't giving us anything. Oli Giroud comes on every game and he pretty much scores. It's brilliant. And all of our strikers offer something different. And people have got to get used to it being a good problem, not a bad problem. We shouldn't be feeling sorry for players going, it's a shame he's not playing. They're professionals. They train hard. Tuchel sees them in training. If one's better than the other, play that player. It doesn't matter about reputation, quality, what they've done before. It doesn't matter. They have to fit the system. If we look at it from a more optimistic side, that's probably a little bit more pessimistic. But if we look at it from an optimistic side, the system can change players. I mean, Jorginho, Christensen, who I'm not a biggest fan of, but credit to him, he's done very well. Kepa, other players we can talk about. I'll talk about those three mainly. Jorginho looks completely different player. He's fundamental to our build-up play. He's fundamental to connecting the pieces between the defensive and the middle third. He's sitting back more. I don't know if you noticed that, Daniel. He sits back more than he ever did, much, which is fantastic. It's probably something that he can do it communicatively, but he doesn't do it physically, right? He's not athletic. So, Christensen, we're very aware, and people have to be very aware he is better in a 3, and we have to keep that aware. But he is improved. The system has improved him. The coaching has improved him. And that's a great thing. That's what coaches have to do. They have to make players better. And he's doing that. So we can't complain. Even those who maybe don't prefer that player or love that player, there's no need for an agenda. You can prefer and not prefer, but don't be agenda. And he's playing well. Be fair enough to say he's playing well. So, promising signs, man. It's good that, the Alonso, another one who's come back. I've always liked Alonso. You just got to understand what these players bring, Daniel. I think a lot of fans don't give them credit and don't understand that they're good at one thing and they're not, and they think they have to be good at everything, but they can't. Alonso's good at one, he's not the other. Ben Chilwell's good at one thing, not the other. So we just got to kind of harp on their positives and harp on what they can do rather than they can't do. And that's what coaches do. They look at the things they can do, not what they can't do.
It's interesting about sort of Tuchel, because to me he feels, in his sense of pragmatism and sort of changing game to game and very much looking at the opponent, looking at the situation, looking at what he needs for that moment, bringing in Marcus Alonso, say, for Burnley, and especially it worked against Newcastle as well, and then maybe altering that for another opposition. It feels Mourinho-esque, like the old Mourinho-esque, where he, not to the same extent, Jose would use 14 players. I mean, it's not the same as I expect Tuchel to use more players, but just in the sense of shifting for the opposition. But having that sort of pragmatism and having that flexibility, but also being a progressive manager too, it's sort of it's a strange blend, isn't it? Because I think sometimes as fans we think of progressive managers as like idealistic, like they only have one way of playing and there's no flexibility whatsoever. I mean, I don't know if you want to sort of touch on that, because I think he's a very modern manager in a sense. I do want to play on the front foot football, but I am also flexible, and I think that's an intriguing thing to look at as a Chelsea manager.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. Another great point from you. And I think in today's game, you have to be progressive, but also flexible. You have to be both. And the reason I say this is I've maintained this from day one. It's a conversation I have with a lot of my friends. It's a conversation I have with a lot of the coaches I work with. And it's my belief. It doesn't mean everybody has to believe it, but it's my belief. And it's very simple, is that football is a game of systems. And I'll give you an example. A system... There's always a system that works, right? And it works in that time, at that moment in football, and that's kind of the trend that's happening. But there's a shelf life for every system. The systems, I tell you, Pep Guardiola's tiki-taka at Barcelona, system. Klopp's Gegenpress, Liverpool, system. Chelsea under Antonio Conte, system. It flew in the first year. Second year, people figured it out. So that's my belief in football, that it's just a trend of systems. Right, and then every 2 or 3 years, a new trend will come up. The thing that separates the great managers from the good managers is they may keep their system, but they alter it and they progress it to fit the current trend in football. And that's what makes Pep Guardiola arguably the best manager on the planet, because he still has his core foundation of playing. He hasn't changed the way he plays. He's just progressed that trend and that system to allow it to work all these years later. Whereas people will argue that Jose Mourinho has been a little bit left behind. He's still a fantastic coach. You can't sit here and say he isn't. And he still is in the top, echelon of football. But he hasn't quite progressed and transitioned into progressive, trendy football as much as the other guys have, which is why you can see the results now. Tuchel is of the same kind of is the same as Guardiola in a way. He has his way of playing. We know he wants to play high intense, pressing football. He wants to win the ball back. But he's also he's flexible, just like Guardiola's been, right? Guardiola's changed shape, he's changed player positions. Fernandinho playing centre back, example. And Tuchel is the same. He's in the same manner. He's trying Callum Hudson-Odoi at right wing back, which nobody would have imagined would be a thing. So Tuchel is very similar to Guardiola in a lot of ways, and he's spoken about how he's very close with Pep. He's studied Pep. He's been looking forward to going against Pep because they're very similar ideologies. And Tuchel is a very modern manager. He's progressive, as you say. He's got a system, but he can also go with a trend, which makes him a very good manager.
Not only looking at this season, and there are bigger tests ahead, and tactically, I think there's a lot to look at there in terms of specifically what he does against higher pressing teams. I'm very interested to see the lineup against Southampton, despite them losing a lot of games recently. I mean, just a quick thing on this. I mean, I'm of the belief that I think that Kante will be in his team, just because I'm concerned about the midfield two of Jorginho and Cover, who've had a lot of the ball. And as you mentioned about Georgie, you look at heat maps, for instance. I mean, he's literally, you watch him on the heat map, and he's literally, not heat map, average positions. He is literally centre of the pitch. Like, it's almost like, you see other players at times, especially against Spurs when we're pressed up the pitch. Callum's playing basically as a right winger. At times, it looks like a lopsided 4-2-3-1, where Reece was pushing up there as well against Spurs. But Georgie and Cover, especially Jorginho, right in the centre of the pitch. What do you think about that? Because I think that's Tuchel's next big test, because it has been an issue for Chelsea. Weirdly, it's been the reverse this year. Last year, we struggled against teams who sat deep. This year, we're struggling against teams, at least in my opinion, in midfield, who press up the pitch. And I think Kante maybe could offer an answer for Tuchel.
Yeah, I'll quickly touch on Jorginho because that's what popped up in my head first, and I'll go into Conte. The difference, if you've clearly noticed the difference, and some people have, and most people have, I would say. Jorginho used to be the initiator of the press. He used to be the instigator of the press, and he would be flying into that. Let's cut the field into 12ths, for example, right, or 8ths. He would be the first or one of the first to be in that 8th where the ball was, and if you saw, he would be kind of commanding the ship as such. But that would be at the same time, which is great if you can win the ball in that area, and then Jorginho is already there to then switch the ball, which is the idea, right? He would be obviously out of position because he's pressing, and they would play over him. They would skip Jorginho, and then he'd be gone because he's athletically not good enough to get back. So the change there has been from Tuchel in a tactical sense is he can still command the press. However, he can do it whilst maintaining in position and keeping balance with the team rather than a full-on Gengen press, because that's trendy. Full-on Gengen press led by Jorginho. There's two ways of doing it. And Tuchel's realised very quickly what Jorginho's limitations are. And he's now found more central in the pitch, but doing the same thing. He hasn't really changed his game. The system has changed around him, which has allowed him to do better. So, yeah, that's it on Jorginho. With Conte, I do believe that Conte faces a little bit of a fight. I don't think it's as simple as, Conte has to play, but he's a fantastic player and he will play a lot in this team. And I think it's a case of, but I know you're going to ask me about it later, so I don't want to spoil the party. But, Conte, yeah, he definitely has a fight to get on in his team. But I agree with you that certain games will require a Conte over a Jorginho for the pure fact of when we're pressed, the energy that he brings, the tenacity that he brings, breaking up play that he brings. That's where he's different to Jorginho. So, yeah, that's what this game is. We're playing so many games against so many positions, against so many tactics that we need different players in different games, and that's the Premier League. And Champions League.
Yeah, absolutely is. And I think his use as well, other than I think everyone looks towards Callum because that has been interesting, but Mason as well, moving Mason up to you call it a roaming number 10 at times. He says, Mason himself said, I'm playing sometimes as a false 9, which is getting him into positions in front of goal a lot more. And I was someone of the belief earlier in the season that he was a lot better deeper, but you're talking about the press there. That's probably why Mason is much higher up the pitch, because that's a player that you do rely on to have that engine to get back and track back and compress. And if he doesn't win the ball initially, he does have the legs on him to get back into central midfield or win it back potentially. And the same with Callum as well, I think. So I've been intrigued by that.